The Elara Myles Files, The Vanishing of Violet Blake. Chapter 1. Smoke over Brackenridge. The sea mist clung low to the coast as Elara Myles drove the winding lane into Brackenridge. Her Morris traveller groaned on the incline, headlights cutting through drizzle and half-light. Beyond the hedgerows, the land dipped toward the sea, and on the horizon a red pulse flared unnaturally bright against the grey dawn. The fire was still smouldering. She hadn't come for that. Not exactly. The postcard had arrived 3 days earlier, watercolour paper, edges frayed, bearing a delicate painting of a gossamer-winged moth. On the reverse, just a line in smudged ink. Come before it's too late. V. No address. Only the name of the village, Brackenridge. Elara recalled Violet's distinct habit of signing with a full flourish, never just a single letter. The E was deliberate. A warning, perhaps, or a misdirection. Now, Violet Blake's cottage was no more than scorched timber and collapsed stone, steam rising from the ruins like breath from the earth. The fire brigade were packing up, their red engine idle at the lane's edge. One of them, wiry, soot-smudged, stepped forward as Elara parked. "You Myles?" he asked, adjusting his helmet under one arm. "Elara Myles, yes." "DC Munro said you'd turn up. He's in the lane, waiting for the pathologist." Elara raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. I wasn't aware I was expected. Word travels fast in these parts, especially when the dead don't usually go up in smoke." The firefighter gestured toward the remains of the cottage. "You'll want to have a look." She stepped past the cordon tape. Smoke still curled from blackened beams, and the acrid smell of burnt wood stung her nose. Rain slicked the ground, turning ash to grey slush. Elara's boots left careful, deliberate prints. The inside of the house was gutted. A few warped picture frames clung to walls that hadn't yet collapsed. Beyond, what might once have been a study was now a husk, scorched bookshelves, a melted kettle fused to the hob. But not everything was lost. On one shelf, near the bottom, something pale caught her eye. She crouched, tugging it loose with gloved fingers. A torn journal page, singed at the edges, bearing a delicate ink drawing of a moth. And beneath it, not Violet's signature, but a curling, looping E. Elara frowned. That wasn't Violet's usual mark. "Morning," she turned. DC Munro, tall and broad-shouldered, stood in the doorway of the ruin. His hair was damp with drizzle, his shoes already wet. He looked too young to have developed the instinctive weariness most officers carried. "Didn't expect you so quickly," he said, "but I'm glad. This one's odd." "Is there a confirmed ID?" "Female, adult. Found near the rear of the property. Body's badly burnt, but will match with dental. No sign of forced entry, no sign she tried to get out. Doors were locked from the inside." "Could have been accidental," Elara said, examining the charred paper in her hand. Munro nodded. "Could have been, but a fire that spreads this fast, well, we're not ruling out accelerants. And Violet Blake wasn't exactly popular. Not disliked either, just absent. She kept to herself? Lived like a ghost. Came into the shop, the post office. Didn't speak much." Ghosts didn't send postcards. Outside, the air had sharpened. Rain had stopped, but the clouds lingered, heavy and low. From the ruins, Elara wandered toward the outbuilding, a wooden shed tucked at the edge of the plot. It was untouched by flame. Odd, considering how thoroughly the house had burned. She opened the door. Inside, the space was quiet, filled with the earthy smell of linseed, canvas, and turpentine. A single easel stood in the middle of the room. A painting, half-finished, sat upon it. The figure in the painting stood on a cliff-top, back-turned, hair tugged loose by the wind. A violet coat billowed around her. Elara tilted her head. It wasn't Violet Blake. The proportions were wrong, taller, broader, shoulders squared. There was distance in the stance, detachment. "Do we know if she had any visitors recently?" she asked as Munro stepped into the doorway behind her. "Only one. Elias Grafton. Runs the local gallery in Ambershade. He came by last week, apparently. Said he was helping her document old pieces. And where's he now? Edinburgh. Said he had meetings with buyers. Due back tomorrow. Convenient. She scanned the rest of the shed. Neat. Sparse. Violet hadn't lived like a recluse, not in the romantic sense. No chaos, no paint-spattered brilliance, just order. Did Violet ever exhibit under any other names? Elara asked, more to herself. Not that we know, Munro said. She stopped painting publicly a decade ago, didn't she? She disappeared from the art world, Elara corrected. Not from painting. Munro raised an eyebrow. You knew her? Briefly. Years back in London, she'd just finished a series on war survivors. Painted like someone was pulling the truth out of her spine. She said much to you? Hardly a word, but she listened, closely. The clouds broke just enough for the morning light to touch the ruin. Smoke drifted from the chimney stack like a final breath. Elara looked back toward the lane, toward the watching windows and closed doors of Brackenridge. It was a typical coastal village. Cornish slate roofs, stone walls, a quiet pub, and a community that noticed strangers. She'd been to enough similar places in Cumbria, Devon, the Welsh coast, places where time slowed and secrets buried themselves. She reached into her coat and pulled out the postcard again. The moth was delicate, ink brushed in whisper-fine lines. But it wasn't just decoration. It was a signal, a trace. Elara had left the Met 5 years ago. Burnout, they'd called it. But it was more than that. The last case had involved a child and a lie, and she hadn't found her way back to herself since. Private work suited her better, quieter, sharper, with fewer constraints. You only took the cases that made the hair on your neck stand up. This one did. Violet Blake had vanished once already, walked away from a claim, turned her back on the noise. If she'd burned, it wasn't by accident. And if she hadn't, well, someone wanted it to look that way. Elara looked at the sky. The village wanted this to be over. But nothing about this felt finished.